Few Australians would be aware of a law in the Northern Territory that allows the mentally ill to be kept in jail indefinitely without conviction. Tonight, the impact of that practice has been described as tantamount to torture. You're about to meet two men. One has been in prison for 4 years without conviction. The other has been in jail for close to 5 years. The two have been held in the maximum security section of Alice Springs Prison because the Territory currently has no other facilities for them. In a moment, we'll talk to the Deputy Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, Delia Laurie. But first, this exclusive report by Suzanne Smith and producer Alison McClymont. On a scrubby, isolated stretch of the Stewart Highway, 20 kilometres from town, sits the maximum security Alice Springs Jail. It is far from the community, far from families, surrounded by kilometres of sandy desert country. Inside this facility are 4 men who have not been convicted of a crime because they were deemed unable to plead. They are mentally impaired inmates with no date for release. One is 23-year-old Kerry Mandaway Doolan and another is 31-year-old Christopher Leo. Kerry has been in jail for 4 years without conviction. Christopher is coming up to his 5th year. Both men are thought to have been born with fetal alcohol syndrome.
Indefinite incarceration for these people is the wrong way to go. It's not a humane response to what is a real medical issue.
Kerry Doolan was born in Mutijulu in 1989. His mother was a petrol sniffer while he was in the womb. At the age of 5, his auntie Kathleen Wallace fostered him. His parents couldn't manage his fetal alcohol syndrome and he was abandoned in Alice Springs.
They were drinking and forgot all about him. He was at the shopping centre all by himself.
What was he like as a child?
I knew he had disability. He couldn't talk much, but we made him talk.
She brought him to live here with her at Santa Teresa. Kathleen looked after 38 other children apart from Kerry.
What do you think of him now being in jail?
He has been there for too long.
Family member Patricia Ellis saw Kerry a month ago in jail.
He is really happy to see us. He's talking about home, want to come home.
Mark O'Reilly is Kerry Doolan's lawyer. Kerry Doolan was put in jail after he threatened his carer, but he was found unfit to plead.
He was charged with an assault. That's been through the court and that's been heard. He's not fit to plead either, and he's someone who has a permanent mental impairment. In that particular case, it was only a threatened application of force. There was no actual physical assault.
Alice Springs has an acute lack of mental health facilities, so high-needs clients end up in jail.
The only response we've got to his situation is to warehouse him basically and keep him in the prison system. So it's disturbing for anybody.
And your family, and you're worried about him.
His legal guardian is Ian McKinlay. Ian McKinlay was a police officer at Papunya in Central Australia in the 1970s and 80s.
Sergeant Ian McKinlay is considered by everyone to be a very good cop.
He now looks after several mentally impaired prisoners in the Alice Springs jail. He is concerned about all of them, but especially Kerry Doolan and Christopher Leo.
Well, my main theory is that they'll continue to deteriorate to a situation where they'll be out of the reach of these therapies that could help them at the present time. While ever they're in prison, more harm has been done, and that's my firm belief.
Christopher Leo found himself in jail after he assaulted a woman at these premises in 2007. Nearly 2 years after Christopher Leo went to jail, Justice Brian Martin conducted a review hearing in 2009. He expressed deep concern that had Christopher Leo been able to plead, he would have only received a 12-month sentence for the assault.
If I had been sentencing Mr Leo under the Sentencing Act, after making allowance for the plea of guilty, I would have fixed a term of 12 months imprisonment.
Justice Martin strongly criticised the Northern Territory government for not providing an alternative to prison.
Custody in jail is quite inappropriate for people like Mr Leo, and they cannot receive the necessary treatment and support that should be available to them. The need for that facility is acute.
Dr Larry Cashin did a neuropsychological assessment of Christopher Leo in 2008 for the courts.
Well, I was quite distressed for Mr Leo, and I wrote a psychological report after seeing him, and I made very strong recommendations in that report to say that it was not appropriate for Mr Leo to be in prison. I understood why he was there, but I also said that, in my opinion, his mental health was going to deteriorate markedly if he had to remain in prison against his wishes.
Dr Cashin says he was under the impression his recommendations in 2008 would be implemented.
It was my belief if he was appropriately monitored and supervised and living in a dry community as he expressly wished, then there would have been a very good chance that he could have lived in the community.
One of the answers to the dilemma of mentally impaired patients in jail is this facility, built right next door to the Alice Springs jail. This safe and secure facility will be open in the next few months. It will house 8 adults and 8 young people. But there are concerns that it is grossly inadequate for the current and future needs of Central Australia.
As against nothing, it's marginally better. As against prison, it's marginally better. But compared to the types of therapies and the therapeutic approaches that are needed and the types of modern disability programs that are currently available, it is ill-informed and primitive.
Dr Cashin says its location and design makes it feel like a quasi-jail.
In my view, it won't help the problem at all. It's not part of the community. If it's built next to the jail, certainly to the inmates, it would feel as though they were in a prison anyway.
But the facility does need to be secure because some inmates can be violent. 2 carers were killed several years ago.
The protection of the community is absolute priority, and I can see it is for government as well. But the risk presented by these clients of the health department is no greater than the ambient risk that exists within the Alice Springs community at any given time. Not to say that it should be added to that level of risk, but these therapies reduce the risk down to insignificant proportions if they're properly implemented.
There is also concern this new facility could act as a holding cell because of a lack of supervised community places for inmates to make a transition into the outside world.
I think that concern's widespread in general, and it's been put to government. And look, I think there's some genuine commitment to try and make this facility work, and there is an understanding that that is a real potential problem.
And there are concerns it won't cater to a growing number of adults in the NT who need disability services.
It's an unknown wave of need is going to be hitting Australia health and welfare systems in coming years, and I believe this is just a vanguard of that wave of young people who have been affected by fetal alcohol damage, reaching adulthood, having received no services, any effective service throughout their childhood, and now being allowed to default to the criminal justice system.
Ian McKinley says leaving prisoners like Christopher Leo with no release date from jail is tantamount to torture.
That would be torture to him. For an Indigenous person to be kept in that type of environment, not being able to get out to country and family, that would be as cruel as you can get.
Kerry Doolan comes from here. This is Aranda country. He grew up here, he went to school here, and some of his family are here. And they say connection to country is the most important ingredient in an Aboriginal person's life for their quality of life, rehabilitation and stability. Santa Teresa hosts the annual horse therapy trek for young men and women recovering from addictions, and Christopher Leo's cousin is part of the team. He says they grew up together in harsh circumstances.
Because of the problem with our families was alcohol involved. So we usually basically grew up into that, and that was pretty hard for us. Yeah.
And do you think the family would like to have him back here?
Yeah, out of jail. Plus, I think you need to put him in probably like a home or something like that.
How important is country for you?
Well, it's really important because you wouldn't be lost or you wouldn't be anywhere without country, because country is so important with your culture as well, see?
Ian McKinley has come to Alice Springs to visit Christopher Leo in Alice Springs Jail. But first he stops to pick up Christopher's closest living relative, Auntie Malpia Medling. Ian and Malpia and her husband take the long journey out to the jail. Malpia needs the lift. The jail's isolation is a real issue for families. Upon their return, they have this assessment of his mental state.
It is a heartbreaking thing to see him, like he's just so bewildered and he just doesn't understand why he's there. And from past visits I know he's confused as to why others come and go and he just stays.
He told me he wanted to come out from jail.
Ian McKinley says it is time for the Health Minister in the Northern Territory to respond to the issue.
I have for the last 3 years been trying to get the Health Minister and all Cabinet to meet and discuss this issue and hopefully to look at the various models of disability support, but they haven't been willing to meet at all, except on one occasion in the early days.
A lot of these people who are in prison in the Northern Territory under these laws have committed fairly low-level offences, and whether they have low intellectual levels or brain damage, they still understand that they're being held against their will in these facilities.
Suzanne Smith, Late Line, Alice Springs.